and gentlemen. We will be talking for the next 20 minutes on the subject of conflict resolution. Indeed, a very hot topic. One thing I wanted to clarify is that this will not completely be a training on how to solve conflicts. First of all, you need a lot of time and energy to really understand the details. And second, my aim today is to give you some facts and discuss conflict within Toastmasters, because we are launching a special conflict resolution team, and I'd also like you to be aware of that. So to start, I wanted to admit that as I was growing up, I never felt that I had to do with conflicts. And I really thought that people were exaggerating when they talked about conflicts and all the problems. My life seemed very easy. In school, at university, I was very quiet, studying and avoiding everything. And then one day, I started working. And that was when the problems began. Because suddenly, I was always in the middle of a conflict. I was a risk manager at a bank for 16 years. And for those of you who may not have experienced this, the risk manager is the person who says no all the time. So people bring in requests for loans, other colleagues, they say, my good client wants this loan, and the risk manager has to say, no, no, no. It's not good for the bank. So every day was a conflict for me with my colleagues, even with clients. So then I realized how important conflicts were. And I realized there was more than one type of conflict, one type of behavior in every conflict. For example, you can have aggressive behavior, the fight behavior, when at least one of the parties wants to confront the other. And that's really hard on the relationship. It often destroys it. It may solve the problem in some way, but the fighting is aggressive. Or you can have passive, when the two parties decide to ignore each other. That's known as the flight behavior. And this doesn't really solve anything if you think about it. So they don't get anywhere. And these are the main types of behavior with a lot more things in between. So I used to see this at work. What really surprised me was how often I ended up seeing it at Toastmasters. The area director, Despina, very nicely said, and I'm happy to hear that she has not experienced any conflict in her team. Well, unfortunately, my dear Despina, in most teams, there is conflict, so you're very lucky, even in Toastmasters. In fact, Toastmasters International considers it so much of a problem that every year at the district leader training, when they collect all the district directors together, it is definitely something on the agenda. Conflict management, conflict resolution, candid conversations, which they try and help you to explain how conversations between two people in conflict should take place. So we have this all the time. Now, I'd like to ask you a question, and you can put your answers in the chat. Why do you think there's conflict in Toastmasters? What things could people be in conflict about? Let's see some answers here. What makes people enter into conflict? Different personalities, very correct. Ego. Misunderstandings, yes. And what are the conflicts about? What could it be in Toastmasters that people disagree on? In the personal problems, authority, power, different points of view. Different ideas, different agendas, indeed. How a role is performed, yes. Level and degree of responsibility. Yes, everything organizational matters. Everything you said is very correct. And also procedures, Alina is saying yes. Yes, Despina has put in a number of correct things, how the role is performed, the behavioral issues. All these are very correct. What I'm going to do now, I'm actually, with these in mind, conflicting cultures, study of values. Definitely bad communication, Maria says, which is a bit sad because we're actually a communication organization, but we see it all the time. So let me bring up the most causes of conflict based on what you've said: organizational matters, the power, authority, different personalities, different cultures, the fact that we have conflicting priorities. I'm actually going to go into some more specifics now. We've talked about general issues that I've seen cause conflict. And one of them is harsh or perceived to be harsh evaluation. So now we're getting into specific things. Very often, especially with new Toastmasters, I've seen them react badly to an evaluation. We are proud that we give evaluations all the time, and it's good to do so. But sometimes it's hard to get the balance, because sometimes, especially a new Toastmaster, can be quite sensitive. So they work for hours and really sweat over a speech, and then in public. And that's another thing people sometimes have a problem with, because they're not used to the Toastmasters culture yet. In public, somebody comes and tells them what they could have done better. And sometimes it's misinterpreted. And it's something very delicate if there's a mismatch between the speaker's expectations and the evaluation given to them. Even 2 days ago, by accident, I received a note from a fellow Toastmaster I know well, and he was apologizing to somebody for having evaluated her in a very strict manner. And it was sent to me by accident. It doesn't matter who did it and how, but even then, very, very experienced Toastmasters involved, and he was apologizing to her because he realized she took offense. We also have the unfair voting. Many clubs vote on best speaker, etc. And while that is a great source of competition, many people love it, I have seen times when people feel that, they put forward an excellent speech, they really wanted the award to be proud, and they didn't get it. And they sort of come into a bit of a conflict with certain people, the club, how the voting was carried out. And this has actually made some clubs drop the best speaker award. The best table topics is always there because you can misunderstand it less, but the best speaker, actually, it's been dropped by some clubs for this reason, because they understand that sometimes you may have an icebreaker and a DTM speech at the same time competing, and it could cause problems. And sometimes judging, even in contests as well, could lead to some conflict. We've seen this time and time again because everything is subjective. Unilateral decisions being made, and this is where some of you talked about organizational methods, the procedures. Sometimes the president will make a decision over something happening in the club, and there'll be people who disagree with it. Something very simple I had to deal with a few years ago. There was a conflict because a club used to be very formal. Gentlemen in tie, it was the old ways, it was an old club. And then one day the president announced that, you can start wearing jeans and be more casual. And the older members, they hated this. So immediately this gave cause to a conflict. Not being appreciated for your contribution. Again, we've discussed this before, it was mentioned in the chat. Some people, they don't agree with the way the club is going. They feel they're contributing a lot, and there never seems to be appreciation. I wanted to mention specifically financial issues. That actually is a great cause of conflict in Toastmasters, with many club members sometimes feeling that the treasurer is not using the club's funds as he or she should, and the president accepting it. Money is always a source of conflict, and that's why treasurers and presidents, you always have to be extra careful with the funds. And then you go to rude and sensitive behavior of fellow members, perceived. And again, that talks about different cultures, sometimes bad communication, different values. These can all cause issues in Toastmasters. And if you move above the club level to go into area, division, and district, it's even more serious because in the district, we have a lot of different countries, as you know. So we have to be very careful there. Why is conflict bad for Toastmasters? Well, let's look at us. I enter a club meeting wherever I go, and I feel this great energy and fellowship usually. I hope you feel it too. But when there's conflict, even if it's just two people in the club who are fighting, you lose some of that energy. Something negative enters into the atmosphere. People start taking sides. There's all this discussion, all this gossip, and we waste time that we could better use supporting others, developing ourselves, and doing what we should be doing as Toastmasters. And the bottom line is that we lose members of our Toastmasters family. I've seen it time and time again. Maybe it's a silly conflict to others about how the voting was performed or an evaluation. You know, we had it in our club. There was a great person and they came and they gave some speeches and then they disappeared. And I spoke to them and they said, I feel I was being treated unfairly. People didn't like me because they gave me very strict evaluations, or, you know, or I was trying to work very hard in the committee. I set up so many projects and nobody seemed to care. Nobody was following. It happens. So it's everywhere in Toastmasters at all levels. And this is why we're proposing now that a District 109 conflict resolution team would add value. We're talking about a panel, a committee of people with expertise who could support. How could they support and how would we go about it? Because one thing I want to emphasize is that they do not have to be experienced people from the outset. I've given a general call throughout the district for interested parties to join the committee because they will be trained and become experienced in conflict resolution techniques. How? We will organize training and special sessions with international experts so as to give our teams a real feeling and a real sense for conflict resolution. Now, here are some tips, some of the things in general that our experts will start learning. And obviously, there's a lot to conflict resolution. They would go in a lot more depth, but I just wanted to leave these tips with you. For example, the first thing is to assess whether the members in conflict are in fight or flight mode. If you remember, we discussed it in the beginning. Are they likely to be confrontational, or are they really upset and ignoring each other? Because the approach you would use to help them is different either way. You would learn techniques to encourage them to calm down. It's very, very important that they're calm, and to try and use empathy to see the situation through the other person's eyes. You would work to help them manage their emotions. And here I would ask you, just put in the chat, what emotions, if you're in a conflict, what are your emotions like? The predominant emotions. Angry, number one. Yes, you're likely to be very angry, and that's usually the main emotion you can see. Frustrated. Yeah, very often there's frustration there. You don't feel people are listening to you. You've got a complaint as well. There's frustration. How about fear? People may not usually associate fear, but Usually there's some fear that, nobody's going to listen to you, nobody understands you. There's discouragement as well, usually disappointment. Yes, correct. There's been a feeling of misunderstanding, as Milton says. You may feel helpless because you're standing there, you feel you have a very good point, you're trying to push it forward, and yet there's opposition. How about guilt? There's also some guilt there, believe it or not. Yes, correct, Elena. Anger hides fear often. That's why, this anger, shame, guilt, because maybe you realize that there were certain things that were done wrong, but you don't want to admit it at that point. There's also ego, confusion. So all these points are coming out, and they need to be recognized and dealt with before you can really go forward. And then you need to help both sides use active listening skills to really listen to the other person and to show them they're listening. Not to try shouting out their own point of view, but to try and exchange ideas with the other person. You need to help them avoid threatening or insulting language. Sometimes even you don't mean to, but if you're upset and you feel all this helplessness and guilt and shame and anger, certain hard things may come out. Instead, you should encourage them to use gestures that show they care and words that show they're listening and they want to hear more. Like saying, okay, I understand this. Could you explain a little more? Or what could we have done differently to encourage the other person to speak? So nobody feels rejection on either side. And you could encourage them to avoid the easier compromise solution and to aim for win-win whenever possible. Now, this sometimes causes confusion because isn't compromise a solution? It is, but actually it's not a win-win solution, which is what we prefer. In fact, sometimes it's a lose-lose. And I will very quickly tell a story that's quite popular in the market. You may have heard it before, but I really like it, about the two sisters and their orange. So two sisters run into the kitchen and they each want an orange, but there's only one left. So they start fighting like sisters. And after a while, they're convinced by their mother to just cut it in half, a compromise. Is it a good solution? Let's see. One sister goes and she uses the inside to make juice. And then she throws the outside away. She only has half a glass of juice, but what can she do? She had to compromise. The other one wanted to bake a cake, an orange cake. So she wants to use the outside, the peel, to flavor the cake. So she uses the outside and she throws away the inside. Her cake is a bit less flavorful, but what can she do? She had to compromise. So I ask you now, was this the best solution? No. The win-win is when you sit down and you examine all the needs and how they're generated. And that way, when you do that, you can realize exactly the best way to do things. If they had discussed and seen what they needed the orange for, one could have gotten all the outside and the other one all the inside. So this is what we're also going to be doing as a team, working to always help people reach win-win. So stage 2, once we have our team and it's being trained, we will disseminate knowledge with other leaders in the district through COTs and DOTs, that's the district officer training. So go into some detail with different officers, different leaders as to how conflicts could be resolved. And we will be there to offer guidance on conflicts. And I want to warn you here that we'll be advisors, not judges. So let's say that Peter and Panayotis, they're in a conflict. They will not come to us so we can say, Peter is right, Panayotis is wrong. Or to say, well, Peter has to do this, Panayotis has to do that, finished. We will guide them through the process and help them come to a solution and an agreement that best serves both of them on their own through our guidance. I want to make this very clear. that the purpose is not to interfere and act as judges, gods in the district. We'll be there to help and support. So these were the messages I wanted to pass through today. As I said, the purpose was not in such a short time frame to go into details on conflict resolution, but to discuss what's happening in our district and how we can possibly find ways to improve things. If you're interested, there is a Google form up. People have already signed up. I'm collecting a few more and looking for trainers, and then we're going to start. I just want to emphasize that this will go on for more than 1 year. People can come in, maybe they will leave after a while, more people will come into the team. But I'm looking at it as a multi-year thing that can support our district. And if you have any questions, you can also send an email to me. I'll put the link and the email in the chat as soon as I've finished for anybody who's interested. And think about it, ladies and gentlemen. If we really get into this and start working on it, it's very interesting and exciting. It will help a lot. And I think in the end, we will start saying conflict, what an opportunity. We will actually be able to improve things. So I hope that you enjoyed this and that you found it somewhat interesting. As I said, conflict resolution is a fascinating topic. So do feel free to contact me for more information.